and welcome to the very first Cult Movie Cult holiday special. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink. And grab your eggnog, put another log on the fire, and don't pick up the phone, because today we're talking about 1974's Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark.
Remember those idyllic scenes out of your childhood? Crisp winter nights, star bright, sleigh bells, crackling Yule logs, candlelight glistening off of shimmering Christmas trees, chestnuts roasting over open fires, carolers beneath snow-covered window ledges. Remember those. Remember them well. After Black Christmas, they'll never be the same again. Black Christmas, starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, and starring John Saxon as Lieutenant Fuller. If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight.
Black Christmas follows the story of a group of sorority girls on Christmas break who begin to receive creepy and malicious phone calls from an anonymous man. At first, they think it's a joke, but when their sorority sisters begin to go missing, they realize that they may be in grave danger.
Yes. That is the basic premise here. This movie is an interesting one, and I'm glad we're doing it for our first holiday special. We decided it would be a little timely for once, Jeremy, with the remake coming out. I'm very proud of us for doing this.
Yes,
We're not usually
getting
timely.
ahead of the ball.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was actually your idea, and because we were originally going to do Silent Night, Deadly Night 1 and 2, and which we will do eventually on one of these holiday specials, but because the remake is coming out, the second remake is coming out in just a few days here. Actually, it's coming out, in about 3 days. It's coming out December 13th, I believe, of 2019. So we decided we'd do an episode on Black Christmas, the original from 1974, like you said, directed by Bob Clark.
Yes. So where to begin with this movie? A lot to unpack here. For sure. This is a movie that is kind of become a real cult film over time. Like a lot of movies we've discussed on this podcast, wasn't a huge hit when it first came out.
For sure.
But had its following. This is actually a Canadian film, which is fun. I definitely have a special place in my heart for Canadian slasher movies. I've definitely seen a few of them that are favorites of mine, which is kind of interesting because in my mind, on a certain level, the idea of the slasher is such an American thing. But today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where some of these movies came from. Because Black Christmas, before we actually get into the plot, this movie is really, really influential from the very first shot of the film, which is a POV shot from the point of view of the killer, which for fans of the slasher genre would recognize that as being the opening shot of another famous slasher film, or perhaps the famous slasher film, Halloween, directed by John Carpenter.
Yeah. Yeah, when that scene happened, the first thing that came to mind was, oh, they're doing the Halloween thing. And then I realized this came out much before
4 years,
Halloween
right?
came out. Yeah, so that was my fault. But yeah, I was kind of blown away, honestly. I mean, because Halloween is thought to be one of the first of what we think of today as a slasher film. Even though there are movies that came out before it that were sort of considered slasher films, but Halloween is what many people consider to be the first one. So that came out in 1979. This came out in 1974. So they were ahead of the curve there, and I think they were doing some pretty wild ideas and things that hadn't really been seen before. And I'm sure POV has been done in movies, countless times, but in this particular film, the way it's done, it's very reminiscent of the which I want to talk about in a little bit, but the Giallo films of Dario Argento and people like that who would, you see the hands of the killer and you never really see the killer because it's a mystery. So throughout the film, you're seeing everything from the killer's point of view. Well, not everything, but you're seeing a
lot of it.
The moments of the killing and whatnot from the killer's point of view. So you see a lot of that here. You never actually see the killer. You may see like glimpses of them in the background and things like that, but you never really find out who it is.
Yeah,
but
you're never confronted with it.
Yeah.
All right, so like we said, beginning of this movie kind of starts with this POV shot. What I really liked about it, kind of first off, is just how they draw you into the world of this film.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a really kind of like I feel like it kind of gets Christmas in a weird way, which is something, there's a lot of movies about holidays
Hmm.
that feel like they're kind of over the top.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. It doesn't feel forced in this movie.
yeah,
It
it
feels like
doesn't.
it's just a part of the scene or a part of what's
Yeah,
going on.
like it feels like it's a movie that you can watch any time of the year and it's
Yeah.
still going to be a good movie. It just happens to be set on Christmas, whereas
Yeah.
a lot of movies, I feel like have to be specifically like, oh, it's a Christmas movie, we're going to watch it around Christmas. But this
Hmm.
one, the setting is Christmas, but there's nothing so specifically Christmassy
Yeah.
about it that it's.
There's no killer Santa like
Yeah, there's nothing like
in
that.
other
It just
movies.
it's
Yeah.
just it's just that time of year which
Hmm.
creates this kind of cold, destitute environment. The fact that they're on break makes it seem like they're a little more stranded
Hmm.
right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then also that some of these characters are like a little tipsy the whole movie.
Yeah.
Also creates this like this
Yeah.
layer of danger, but it's also this funny little Christmas thing because it's like this feels like the holiday season. Like they have
Hmm.
the sorority mother in this
Hmm.
film who I believe that role. I actually read that role of the sorority mother was originally offered to Betty White, but she turned it down,
Oh wow.
which would have been a really
Been something.
interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
if this movie wasn't enough of a cult movie, that would have
That would have really.
taken it to another
Yeah.
level. But this
Hmm.
idea, it's kind of like this weird surrogate family around the holidays, and each
Hmm.
character kind of fills their own little niche of like who they are and where they fit in. So when these calls start coming in, you kind of immediately get this really rich characterization and feel like you know these people.
Yeah.
It kind of challenges the thing that we go on to see in a lot of 80s slasher movies, where there's just kind of like your one main character who's like the good girl, and then
Hmm.
everybody else is kind of like ditzy or sexually promiscuous, but like they don't really
Yeah.
have any characterization. Where like all of these characters felt human and interesting,
Yeah.
and I wanted to see what was going to happen to them and where they would go.
Definitely. They felt very lived in, like very lived in characters. And
Hmm.
Margot Kidder, especially, is in the film, and she has a very naturalistic way of
Hmm.
acting. And I thought that gave it a lot of depth, and it kind of brought it to another level, like you said. It could have just been a run of the mill, hey, it's Christmas, and throwing a bunch of Christmas themed things in your face, or iconography and stuff. But it's really
Hmm.
just more of like a feel.
Yeah.
Like they're having a Christmas party, but just the way it's lit and the different things that are going on just gives it that feel of Christmas time.
Hmm.
And there just happens to be a homicidal maniac
Yeah.
stalking them.
Yeah.
So the first thing that he does, this killer, is he makes a call, and that's pretty much what starts off the events of the movie. So it's during this holiday party where they receive a phone call from a stranger, which is now sort of a trope that you see a lot. I mean,
Hmm.
it was lampooned famously in the Scream movies.
Yeah.
But this was still a little early on in these types of films. So,
Hmm.
and I thought the phone call itself, it can come off as a little silly and like a little over the top, but it
Yeah.
also has a way of being a little creepy. I thought because
Yeah.
yeah, the things that he's saying, and he's just really really going for it. And some of
It's just so explicit and so kind of twisted
yeah
that like you
yeah.
almost laugh at it, but then you kind of put yourself in the shoes of being in that situation and
Mhm.
realize how absolutely horrifying it would be to get a phone call like that.
Well, he sounds unhinged. Like he
Yeah.
sounds completely deranged.
Yeah, he kind of sounds like the Joker in Batman or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But like
Something
way
like that,
crazy,
yeah.
like not like an
Yeah.
evil genius mastermind, just someone who's just totally flown off the handle and
Yeah.
has absolutely nothing to lose, including
Right.
his mind, which is already far out the window.
And at first, it is kind of almost funny, like it's because it's kind of ridiculous the things that he's saying, and Margot Kidder's character is having a good time with it and kind of giving him stuff back, and but eventually he keeps going with it, and yeah, he gets pretty explicit with some of the stuff he says, and it kind of takes off from there, and they realize that this might be someone who has more on his mind than just like a prank phone call, like he's so that's when the uneasy feeling begins, and all the characters are kind of on edge from there on out.
Yeah, it's also interesting too. Just talking about because what's so interesting to me about this movie is as we talked about right at the beginning of the podcast here, this was kind of a precursor to the slasher, but in a way is a slasher movie. Like it
Mhm.
kind of follows the formula, but it really
Not a very high body count, but it definitely has moments.
yeah.
That,
Well, and
yeah.
there are plenty of good slasher movies that don't have a high body
True.
count. But
Very true.
what's interesting is that like all of the things that personally, I have like gripes, and I love the slasher genre. I've watched so many slasher movies. It's one of my
Oh
favorite
yeah.
genres, just because I find it to be like purely a cinematic thing. It's all about
Hmm.
creating suspense. It's all about, putting you on the edge of your seat, which is just super fun to watch,
Hmm.
regardless of all the kind of subversive stuff that 30 years later we look at now and are kind of not as
Hmm.
fond of. But this movie, one thing that I really enjoyed about it is a lot of the things that I find kind of trite or played out in slasher movies. This movie seemed to avoid.
Hmm.
For example, I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure we don't actually see anyone get murdered on screen.
Um, Not that I can recall.
Yeah,
You may see exactly right after it, but you don't really see the actual act of the
yeah,
killing.
you see the aftermath, but I think what that does is it keeps it in this kind of like psychological space,
Yeah.
where
Well, Bob Clark did say he considered this more of a psychological horror film rather than a slasher
a
film,
slasher, yeah, which I totally
which I can
get,
definitely see. Yeah.
because I think it never let itself become about the how you could violently murder
Hmm.
these
Yeah, the
people.
most creative ways that characters can
Yeah,
get killed off, right?
and the ways they were murdered was really creative, but it
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't violence porn. It was like
Hmm.
it was about how you kind of got there. It was about the feeling, but then all of
Well,
a sudden they were gone. And what's interesting
yeah.
with that is it kind of puts you in the position in a way of like of the main character,
Hmm.
played by Olivia Hussey of Romeo and Juliet fame.
Right.
But it kind of puts you in her shoes in a way, not directly, obviously, because she
Yeah.
wasn't finding these bodies right away, but in the sense that if you were in a situation where something like this is happening, all you're seeing is the aftermath.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's happened, and your imagination has to
Hmm.
kind of wander, and you have to piece together, what
Hmm.
happened to these people, and I think that's a lot scarier maybe than seeing it
Yeah.
happen.
The very first death we don't see at all. We actually
Yeah.
just see the body afterwards,
Hmm.
in the plastic dress bag.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's not really much violence in the film, and that kind of differentiates it from Giallo films, which
Hmm.
are very over the top and
Extremely violent.
stylistically bloody and violent,
Hmm.
Which is great in its own right, but
Yeah.
just not this kind of film. This is more psychological, I think. So,
Hmm.
and more atmospheric, I would say, as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, this does it in like a kind of more sly way.
Yeah,
You have
it
the
creeps up on you.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have the feeling of violence. I would think about it, if we talk about a movie like Reservoir Dogs or something like
Hmm.
that, where when you think back to it, it feels like it was this really violent movie, but you
Hmm.
realize that there's only actually about a
Yeah,
minute to 2 minutes of actual violence in the whole movie.
it's actually a
Um,
very restrained film.
yeah,
I realized. Yeah.
yeah, or a Hitchcock movie, and I'm sure
Hmm.
Hitchcock was an influence on this,
Hmm.
um, where it's the same thing. Which Hitchcock probably was kind of acting in that way more because of the censors that he had to get around.
Yeah.
But where there were some really crazy violent things that would happen in a Hitchcock movie, even in
Hmm.
what I think is probably his most violent movie, which is Psycho, with the
Hmm.
shower scene. Like you never actually see her get stabbed at any point.
Right.
Um,
It's the human mind that fills in the blanks, and
yeah,
we
it's the
think we see
implication.
things. Right. Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I don't know, especially for the '70s, which was a time when I think a lot of filmmakers were really trying to push the boundaries of what they could show on screen.
Hmm.
You had a lot of filmmakers experimenting with
Taking
extreme
risks.
violence,
Yeah.
nudity,
Hmm.
profanity, like drug use. All they're just like really pushing those things for the first time. And
Hmm.
this film was so reserved, but like it felt a lot crazier. Like it felt like they went a
Hmm.
lot further than a lot of those movies
Yeah,
for
for
some
sure.
weird reason.
But yeah, this movie, there's not many actual murders depicted, and really, like I mentioned, body count, because usually when you think of slasher film, you think of, like
Hmm.
we said, all the creative ways that the characters get killed off. But yeah, in this movie, it's very much, it's almost the opposite in a way.
Hmm.
It's more the in between moments that we're focusing on.
Yeah.
And there are some scenes. Well, I guess I'll talk about it now with the spoilers again.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah, so always spoilers. Margot Kidder's character Barbara, I thought her death was maybe because it's the one we see the most of, but
Hmm.
the one that I thought was the most memorable, and the imagery of it was really something. She has a stabbing death, and it's juxtaposed with children singing carols outside,
Hmm.
and there's glass breaking, and it's very stylish, a very giallo death,
Yeah.
actually.
Hmm.
And I thought that moment was really well done, and almost very artistically done for a murder scene.
Yeah. No,
um,
it was pretty beautiful.
yeah, so like the murder scenes that are there, I feel like were done very well
Hmm.
and skillfully. But yeah, you don't see too much. Mostly it's the calls. So so these sorority sisters are receiving these mysterious calls from the stranger who is being very overly descriptive in certain
Hmm.
sexual acts and making pig noises and just being generally just despicable.
Hmm.
And so obviously right after this, not only does one of their own girls go missing, but they learn of another girl that's gone missing as well, and they start to put pieces together. And with the help of the police, they start to try to figure out what's going on. And the rest of the movie kind of goes into more of like a mystery, who done it, who the killer is,
Hmm.
and of course there's the red herring of the main character of Jess, who's played by Olivia Hussey,
Hmm.
her boyfriend, because we're led to believe because she ends up getting pregnant, and so I believe she wants to have the baby, but he does not, right? So they get into
Oh no, no, she does
oh
not.
no, I'm sorry,
She does not want to have the
I'm
baby.
sorry,
He
she does
wants
not,
to.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Let me
which is actually really progressive for a 1970s movie.
so she does not want to have the baby, but he does, right? And
Hmm.
you're right; it's very progressive, especially for this time to see that. So yeah, it was
Hmm.
interesting. Kind of flips it on its head a little bit, and so they have this disagreement and argument, and just little clues here and there, and the lieutenant starts to put these pieces together, and her boyfriend Peter
Hmm.
is the one who is suspected to be the caller and also the killer of these young women, and so that's what we're led to believe for like the latter half of the film, and so the ending is really I guess we'll get into that now because there's not too much plot to talk about. There's a lot of back and forth with the police, and basically it gets to the point where we're all but certain that it is Peter, that Peter is the killer.
Hmm.
But we get to that ending scene where so Jess actually confronts him, and they have a confrontation, and he actually the killer chases Jess through the house. We don't see who the killer is.
Hmm.
And then Jess locks herself in the cellar, and Peter appears outside one of the windows. He smashes a window, climbs in, and she bludgeons him with a poker. And because she's assuming he's a killer, obviously. So then the police arrive because she's screaming, and they discover her, in the basement, barely conscious, on the floor, and with Peter's bloody body next to her, and they take her and discuss the murders and all of that, and the movie ends with her being left in the house by the police, and because the policemen are outside now, and we think
Believing
everything
that
is
the problem is solved. Yeah.
believing that everything is over and done with, and
Hmm.
we have a happy ending. But because it's a horror movie, there's never a happy ending, right? So we see that the killer is still alive, and he actually climbs down from the attic and creeps into a room where Jess is,
Hmm.
where she's staying in the house. So, and that's when the telephone begins to ring again, and the credits start to roll. So, we don't know what happens from there. We can assume something not great.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a downer ending, and it's kind of dark because
Yeah.
she is pregnant at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting, and I thought it was very interesting because you're not really supposed to know who the killer is, and that's
No.
the main point of it. Is what they were going for, is that it could be anyone, and we still don't know.
Yeah.
And really doesn't matter. It could just be a random stranger,
Which is so scary. Like,
which is the scariest thing of all. Yeah.
it's like when you have a horror movie that just gives you all the answers, and by the end you know who the killer is, you know why they
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah.
Like that's scary.
Everything's explained.
It's like
and-
it's scary, but like it's a lot to me. It's a lot like the scariest thing in the world is when you're walking down a street late at night, you're all alone and it's dark out, and it's not like that. It's not the idea that someone who could come out and mug you or something like that. It's the idea that you don't know what could pop up out of anywhere, and you have no knowledge of who it is or what it is, and you know what I mean. It's the unknown, which is scary, and the fact that we never find out who this killer is like makes it really frightening, especially because at one point there is a shot of the killer. We do get one shot, but it's kind of lit in a way where we see he kind of looks like Peter, the boyfriend, but so it's clearly a young man, which means it's probably someone on the college campus,
Yeah.
one of the college students, which is extra particularly frightening because we're never shown him, which means that, you know, it's not this, you know, like a scary old man. It's not, you know, it's a young person who's just kind of doing his thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's, yeah, like you said, it's much more unsettling to know to not know who that person is. It just makes it stay with you a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think.
And the suspense is done so beautifully too that by the time you get that, it's a real payoff. Particularly one moment that I really, really, really loved was when Jess was running from the killer and she goes into the basement and the killer is shaking this basement door, hitting it, trying to get it open, and he can't get it open. And it's like intense, you know, it's loud, and then all of a sudden he just stops and just walks away.
Yeah.
And it's the most horrifying moment. Which is kind of counterintuitive because generally, you know, the rule of thumb is that when you're building suspense, you're generally trying to keep it going as long as possible. You know, like a conventional way of doing that in a suspense way is he's pounding the door, he's pounding the door, he's pounding the door, and then he kicks it down, and then you go on to your next suspenseful moment. But what's so beautiful about this is it's like he's pounding the door, and then he stops. But you have no clue why he stopped. And for the same reason why it's scary not knowing who the killer is, at the end it's scary in that moment not knowing why he stopped, because it's like, well, what's he doing? You know, is he going to come around to another, which obviously that's the
Well, then
the
Jess
misdirection.
assumes that he's the one, coming into the window. So then that's why she. But I know what you're saying. Yeah, it definitely creates more suspense because you're like, what is he doing out there?
Yeah, what
Why
is he doing out there?
So
Like,
quiet?
what kind of deranged thing is he doing with this door closed? Is he going to burn the house down? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's
Well,
just
we don't know because we don't know anything about him. This character is capable of anything. And that's what makes it so crazy because, you know, instead of trying to make a villain who's relatable and that we see his point of view and all of that, well, we do see his point of view, but we don't see, we see his visual point of view. But that's all we get. We don't know anything else about him. That, like we said, makes it a lot more scarier and a lot more eerie.
Well, in the same way that as we talk about the influence of this movie, that a Michael Myers character, obviously, you know, all of the sequels to the Halloween movies explain the Michael Myers lore to the point of
Which
oblivion.
they ignored in the new remake.
Yeah, but, you know, it's like in the first one, if you go back and watch that movie, other than the fact that this little kid kills his, you know, sister and a bunch of people in the first scene. The baby, like, you don't really know a lot about this killer.
Right.
And that's what makes him so scary because you understand that the main characters have some kind of connection to him, but he seems to not have any sentimentality about who he's choosing to kill or why.
Right.
And it seems random, and I think that's what's so scary, and what's so scary about this.
Because in the second Halloween, they reveal that it's really Laurie's brother.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that makes it, you know, I mean, that gives it a connection and a backstory, but sometimes you don't need that.
You don't need it,
like,
it's scarier sometimes for it to just feel random and out of place and frightening.
And scarier to not see certain things, much like the shark in Jaws. You know, you don't see it for most of the movie, and it's to me one of the scariest, you know, monsters on film. So, so it just speaks to what the filmmakers were going for here, and they really were going for that more psychological angle. And I did want to discuss the filmmakers because, well, Bob Clark is the director of the film, and we have a very different kind of Christmas movie from him. So he's known for A Christmas Story, which came out later, actually in 1983. And A Christmas Story is, it's a certified classic. People love that movie. They show it 24 hours on TV. I don't know if they still do that, but I know they used to on Christmas. And people love it, and they'll just watch it over and over. And there's certain scenes and moments from it that are just iconic. And A Christmas Story definitely has that black humor to it. Though obviously this is a bit different, being an R-rated horror movie. And Bob Clark also directed Porky's 1 and 2. After Black Christmas, and actually around the same time as Black Christmas, he did direct another horror-themed film called Dead of Night, which I've not seen, but I was reading about it. And so really the films he made that were aimed at children came later. So with a Christmas Story, and he also made Baby Geniuses 1 and 2.
Legendary.
The legendary films.
The canonized shining examples of the pinnacle of the art of cinema.
Yes.
Baby Geniuses 1 and 2.
Hey, maybe they are brilliant.
No, they probably are. I haven't seen them.
know?
I mean, this was brilliant, so I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
But.
Well, he's he's capable of making great films, as we've seen, so you never know. But but thinking about A Christmas Story and what Bob Clark is most known for. I mean, do you think there are echoes of his earlier films in his most known work, In A Christmas Story? Do you think, can
Um,
you draw connections between that, or is it completely
it's
out of the
hard for me
realm?
to say because it's been years and years and years since I've seen A
Same,
Christmas Story. But
same.
what I do remember of it, I remember it being kind of suspenseful in like a fun way.
Yeah, and
Um,
like I said, it has that black humor to
yeah,
it,
like the
which
dark humor. So yeah, so I could definitely see it.
hmm
Obviously, we're talking about very different genres,
yeah,
and kind of what he's working with here. But yeah, I mean, I think in any filmography, there's going to be traces of the filmmaker in everything they
hmm
touch.
yeah,
It would be interesting. I'd like to go in and rewatch it now. Actually,
yeah. And it
um,
is. I mean, you can't get around the fact that it's bizarre that he went from
yeah,
these R-rated movies, because there's this film which is an R-rated horror movie, and then the Porky's movies, which are R-rated,
hmm
like teen gross out movies or whatever you want to call them. So he went from those films to this children's film, but I do think there's adult humor in A Christmas Story.
hmm
Again, I haven't seen it in a while either, but
yeah,
I do remember there being things like that in there, and
hmm
I don't know if he was trying to reach a different audience or if this was just a project that was brought to him and he just,
yeah.
he thought he give it a shot.
Or maybe he
Um,
had. I mean, I don't know too much into his life, but maybe he had kids or something too. I've definitely
right? Yeah, you never know. I mean, this was
yeah.
later in life. That came out in '84, like I
Which
said.
isn't that
So,
much. It's 10 years later. It's not like it was like two totally
or I'm
different
sorry,
eras.
'83. Well,
83,
I was
yeah.
close,
So
but yeah,
it's not even a decade after Black Christmas.
yeah.
So it's not like we're talking about like
It's not a lot of
30
time, but
years passing, but
yeah, but also 10 years or whatever,
mhm,
9 years, a lot could happen.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Like it's but either way, it's interesting to go from one to the other. And he did make another horror film, like I said, around the same time as Black Christmas. So there's that as well. I haven't seen that film, but I'm interested to check it out.
Mhm.
Based off this, I do kind of wish he made more horror films because I really enjoyed this, and I think he did want to make a sequel to this or something in the same vein as this afterwards. But like we said, this film didn't do too well,
Yeah.
so he wasn't really able to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, so
As it
yeah,
is sometimes with directors in the movie industry where,
hmm
if something doesn't hit, you
hmm
move on to something else.
yeah. And that's
Um,
maybe that's just what happened here, because then he went to the teen comedies and
mhm,
then to a family film,
yeah.
which is fine. I mean, directors are free to make whatever movies
Yeah.
they want.
No, I
I just
mean,
find it, I find it interesting.
yeah,
I
it
guess.
is rather bizarre because a lot of directors, like you'll see directors make kids movies,
hmm
but it sometimes feels like it's just like a brief little departure.
Yeah.
Like you'll see like Martin Scorsese do Hugo.
Right.
You know
Like
what
a
I
little
mean?
offshoot.
But
Yeah.
it still feels like it's part of his filmography and it fits in.
hmm
But it kind of feels like an offshoot. It doesn't feel like it's like when you're
Yeah.
talking. Even though I think that actually probably is one of Scorsese's best movies.
Yeah. It's a really good movie.
Yeah, it's terrific. But it's not. You're not going to sit there and talk about it with Goodfellas and
Yeah.
now The Irishman as we talk here
Right.
in December
And
of
also,
2019.
yeah, and also it's all labels as well. I mean,
Yeah.
because to call it a kids movie or a family movie, I mean, it's still just a film at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. But
whether
it,
it's geared toward
but
one
it does
audience or
just
another.
yeah, but it does just seem like a rather large jump
Right.
for this particular director. It just
Yeah,
seems
from
like
Psycho Killer to yeah,
a
uh,
real 180.
to getting
Uh,
your tongue stuck on a
yeah,
pole.
a poll, which could be an interesting thing
Yeah.
to add to
Yeah.
a Psycho Killer movie.
Yeah.
I
Actually,
don't
has that
know.
been done before? That's a
I
good
don't
idea.
know. Yeah, maybe we need to make a Christmas story. A Black Christmas story.
Yeah. Or recut the trailer, maybe.
Yeah, a mashup.
Yeah. Like the opposite of the Shining trailer.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I did want to talk about with this because I mean, it's come up a couple times in this episode already. But kind of the idea of the slasher formula that was developed later on and used through most of the 1980s. And one thing that is kind of always in those slasher movies, or almost always, is and as we talk about the remake of this movie, which we'll get to in just a minute here, is particularly in the roles for women in these movies, is that they kind of fit into very cliched roles that we get seen over and over again. So you have the main character who's the final girl, who's kind of the Virgin Mary type, just perfect, can do no wrong, but for some reason is just surrounded by a bunch of really sexually promiscuous, wild, over the top people, and it's kind of like the most promiscuous young woman would get killed in the most violent way, and at the end of the day, the final girl survives. Which what I think was really interesting about this movie is that our main character, the one we're made to relate to the most, is not only pregnant, which means she is sexually active, but like she wants to have an abortion, which makes her particularly in the 70s, we're talking about a time when like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist were kind of the pinnacle of horror, which means that there was definitely still kind of a Christian, wholesome, like that. What scared people was this idea of the devil and and demons, and so this idea of a character that we're not only supposed to follow, but we're supposed to like, who's wanting to get an abortion, and she's the one we're kind of rooting for, is really, really subversive, even for today. I think in a horror, like in a horror movie today, I think that would even still to this day be a hard sell. But like I find her to be a really likable character. A lot of that I think due to Olivia Hussey's performance, which I absolutely love. That we have this sorority girl with an accent who kind of sounds like she's a 1930s or 40s, Shakespeare.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that's funny.
Like it's kind of funny, but yeah, she gives a great performance, but she's so likable, which is just so subversive. It's really interesting and really exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like you said, the tropes are there, but the tropes of the slasher film, which wasn't even really a thing yet, are there, but they're also turned on their heads, like because you have the college co-eds and whatnot, and the deranged killer, but certain aspects of it, like you said, are what you would not expect, I would say, from a film like this. So.
And I wonder if watching it when it came out, if this movie would have felt as kind of interesting and compelling, or if it feels almost more interesting and compelling now with the knowledge of what came after it.
Maybe that's why, or at least part of the reason why it went under the radar a little bit. Maybe people didn't know what to make of it at the time. Well, but now it feels subversive because every time we think we know where this movie is going, because we think we've seen this movie 1,000 times, and then it goes in a different direction. It's like, whoa! But I'm just wondering if watching it without the knowledge of Halloween and everything that came after it, if it would be that surprising, or if it would kind of just be like, this is a little bizarre and dark. Well, the big trope, and I do want to talk about this because, so as I'm watching the film, towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where the lieutenant is. He finds out that the calls are coming from inside the house. So, which was a little bit of an eye roll moment, to be honest. But. So it's an eye roll moment, and I was like, oh, there it is. Like when he said that, but then I did a little bit of research, and I was very interested to find out. So it comes off as a very cliched moment because you hear that so many times. The call is coming from inside the house. And you've heard that so many times at this point in different movies and parodies of it and stuff like that. But after looking into it a little bit. It seems it may have actually originated with this film. Yeah, which is believable. Because this predates When a Stranger Calls, because that came out 1979, which is usually the film widely associated with that line. Although the idea itself of the call coming from within the house goes back to some urban legends as well. So it does have like a history, but as far as on film, this may be the first time. I don't know if I could definitively say that, but from what I was looking at or reading about, it appears so. So that was very interesting. And again, that kind of goes back to these tropes that we think we know and all that, being turned on their head. And I mean, they were kind of, like ahead of the curve, I would say.
Well, and tropes become tropes because they're good to begin with. It's like people don't copy things that are terrible. People try to copy things that are really, and it is really good. It's really clever, particularly, for then when it's like, we didn't have cell phone and call it. There's a really great joke.
That was a big deal.
There's a really wonderful joke that I've always loved in Scream 2. And it's like the main character, I believe is it Sydney or Cindy? I always get it mixed up because in the Scary Movie franchise, the character I think is Cindy, but whatever, someone who sounds like that. But she gets a call and it's the scary killer's voice, but it's the second movie, and she just is like, oh hi, such and such from Seattle, Washington, and because she has caller ID. And she's just like, she solved the whole problem because she has caller ID. Which is so
technology
funny.
Was already becoming a problem for these movies.
Although I will say the sequences in this movie of them trying to identify where the call is coming from are brilliant. Yeah, like those long dolly shots where they're flying through all these gigantic rigs that are connected to the phone lines are so compelling and so fun. The lighting, I mean, the cinematography in
Yeah.
this movie
Oh,
is
definitely. Yeah.
unbelievable. There's
Yeah.
even, and it's a thing, I've kind of grown to be fond of it. I know it's not something that's everybody's cup of tea, but you can really, really see grain in this movie. Like it's, and it might have just been the print that whatever upload, this, I watched this on Amazon Prime.
Same.
The particular print, I guess, or maybe just the movie was shot, and I think they were shooting in a lot of low lighting situations, which is probably
Yep.
why you get that
A
really
lot of
extreme grain.
candles and yeah.
And like I kind of love it. To me it just gave the whole thing this sense of movement. It's obviously a little distracting when you really see grain because it reminds you that you're watching a movie. But once you kind of settle into it, just this grain and just this constant movement to me gave it this kind of dizzying effect, particularly when we were getting shots that were like lit by Christmas lights. And it like wasn't clean. It was like dark, and you had kind of to strain your eyes to really see what was going on. And it just gave this film this real sense of life. I wonder,
Yeah.
it was really, really rich cinematography.
Cinematography, the atmosphere is incredible. I think brings it to another level for sure. So yeah, one may be tempted to look at this film as just another horror movie, but I think there's a lot more going on here, and definitely a film worth taking a look at if you're a fan of film.
Yeah.
Or, there's a lot going on. So yeah, we talked about the tropes. We talked about Halloween. I do just want to touch on the Giallo influence again. Well, first, I mean, I guess I just want to ask you, Jeremy, do you think there is a Giallo influence, or do you think that was coincidence? Or
No, I think there's definitely a Giallo influence. Particularly the movie that popped into my mind. I went through a large Giallo phase. I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago at this point. So they're a little fuzzy to me. They're not super fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
But the movie
They
Blood
tend to blend together.
Yeah, they do a
after
little
while.
bit. But the movie Blood and Black Lace, directed by
I haven't seen
Mario
that one.
Bava, which actually came out in 1964. So for a young budding Bob Clark was probably right about the era when he was very
Right.
very enthusiastic about discovering movies.
Impressionistic.
Yeah, I thought of that a lot. That's a movie that's kind of the image that's kind of been sustained from that movie is this killer who wears a kind of like stocking or something over his face so you can't see him.
Yeah.
But just this idea where like you're just seeing kind of as we talk about, the blood the Giallo trope where you're not really seeing the killer, you're just kind of seeing like
The
his
hands, point of view.
Yeah, and point of view. And so it felt directly in that. Also, a lot of the lighting things in that movie, there's some really great like deep red and green lighting cues. So that movie popped into my mind. What about you? Do you have any specific examples, Mark, that you kind of were thinking of?
I went on a big Argento kick recently, so I watched a lot of his films in succession, and particularly so. The first 3 films is considered like his animal trilogy because they all have animals in the title or insects. His first 3 films, so Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat of Nine Tails, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet, they all came out before Black Christmas. So a lot of his more famous ones like Deep Red or Suspiria had not come out yet. But there's those films to draw from, and I think those do have lots of moments that I could kind of make a correlation to whether or not he was, inspired by those films or not. I have no idea. I wasn't able to find any interviews about that or anything like that. So, it's all speculation. But I figured there had to be some sort of, because like you said, when he was growing up and an impressionable young youth or impressionable youth, he was probably watching these movies and retaining them in some sort of a form. I feel like you couldn't make a horror movie around that time without at least being aware of these films. So, so maybe just it kind of sunk in somehow, or maybe he really was trying to call to mind the point of view scenes from those movies. I'm not sure, but the fact that you don't see the killer in Black Christmas is a huge part of the movie for sure. So.
Absolutely.
But yeah, just something interesting to think about. So there's Halloween, which did the POV after this, and then the Giallo films, which did it a lot before. So it's hard to say, but who influenced who or whatnot. But but this movie is very influential. So influential, in fact, that it has spun not one but 2 remakes.
Yes.
So one of these came out in 2006. And I have not seen it. I remember when it came out, and I I looked up the trailer again. I was actually kind of strolling through a little bit and watching some of the film just to kind of get an idea of it, get a feel of it. And so it's directed by Glenn Morgan, and the only other film that he directed really was Willard, which is another remake. And I did like that film because it starred a perfectly casted Crispin Glover. And it was just like, it was so spot on with the type of character that he was playing, just a very deranged and eccentric character. So I actually remember kind of liking that film. And so I was a little curious about this remake that he did of Black Christmas, and checked out the trailer and some parts. And it seems to be a much more, I would say, gratuitous, I guess. It's also fairly generic. It's more like the types of horror movies you'd see, now that kind of flood the screens of movie theaters, where it's just like a group of teenagers getting killed off, or a group of college kids getting killed off. But it also seems to be playing up the campier angle of a Christmas horror movie a little bit.
Yeah.
So it actually has a line where she says "Merry Christmas, motherfucker." So yeah, it's that kind of a movie.
It's very mid 2000s horror.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very mid 2000s horror remake, which there was a lot of them and continue to be. So leading us to the 2019 remake, which is coming out very shortly, or actually will probably be out by the time you listen to this.
Yes.
Now this is directed by Sofia Takal. Is it?
Yeah.
Takal.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Which I have some very distant degrees of separation from, because, and I didn't realize that she was the one who directed this film until I was reading about it. But so she actually acted in a 2011 film by a friend of mine called The International Sign of Choking. And I knew that I had heard the name before, and I looked her up, and I was like, oh, that's her, same person. She's worked with some other New York friends of mine and stuff like that. So sort of a weird connection that I stumbled upon there, which is kind of interesting, which made me more curious to check it out. And the trailer, it seems interesting. It's Jeremy, we were saying, because we actually watched it together before this, and we both thought it looked extremely different than the 1974 Black Christmas.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a movie I've been dying to talk about on this podcast, and eventually we'll find a way to do it, called Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2, which is a sequel to Prom Night, but has actually nothing to do with the first Prom Night. And I don't know, I haven't seen this Black Christmas yet, but it looks like it's almost a different story using kind of the same name, which could be very exciting.
Which could be cool, yeah.
Yeah, which it could be cool because, people are innovating and films are constantly changing. So I am actually really curious to kind of see how they do it.
It seems like there's like a conspiracy plot going
some
on.
kind of conspiracy theory, and it kind of seems like more of an action
organization behind it or something, yeah.
Yeah, it almost kind of seems more of like an action movie, though. Like, it's kind of about how these people are going to fight back, which is really exciting in its own right. I think whereas this, the 1974 version of Black Christmas is a lot more kind of psychological. It's a lot more about the fear of what's lurking in the dark. And it's not about how you kill what's lurking in the dark. It's about how what's lurking in the dark could come find you. And I think it is interesting, politically speaking, that Black Christmas is the movie of all the movies that are being remade that is kind of being remade of the slasher genre, that is being remade as kind of like a feminist film, because of all the slasher movies, I think this one actually kind of, even though women are being murdered in this movie, I didn't think it felt cheap. I didn't think that in this movie women were being murdered for entertainment. Going back to the fact that we didn't really see it, I think in this movie, more than a lot of the other slasher movies that have come out since, women are actually, like, we're made to identify with them. It's supposed to be scary.
It was a complex main female character as well, like we talked about with the the pregnancy subplot and things like that. So it's almost like it's come full circle, because the original film was already putting these tropes on its head, and we're looking at things from different angles and being pretty complex, I thought. And then the 2006 remake appears to be more of just like a fun,
campy slasher movie.
All out, campy slasher movie set during Christmas. And then now this new film seems a little more action oriented, like you said, but also it does have that angle of being like postmodern. At least that's what I get from the trailer. A little bit like against the tropes of the slasher movies that we've mostly seen. So it seems in that respect, more in the vein of the original Black Christmas. But uh,
We shall see.
we shall
Yeah.
see. But, yeah, I generally have low expectations when it comes to modern remakes, especially of horror films for whatever reason. But
Unfortunately, yeah.
unfortunately, I mean, I always want to like them going into it, and then I'm disappointed. So, but who knows? Like we said, we shall see.
Yeah.
May end up being great. May end
Also,
up being
worth noting
nothing.
that this current remake is a Blumhouse film, um, which is just kind of interesting because they kind
Yeah.
of have the market on horror films totally cornered right now. And there's definitely a certain style to a Blumhouse film. They kind of have a certain feeling. Maybe with the exception of like there have been a few that kind of fall outside of the horror genre. Like Whiplash was a Blumhouse film. Get Out, which I guess is technically a
Yeah, I saw
horror
that.
film, but I think is kind of more almost meant to be it's scary, but it's really kind of more of almost of a political thriller, is how I'd put it. Um, but yeah, so it should be interesting seeing what kind of treatment this film gets, and all very exciting stuff because it's interesting seeing how I think the beauty of remakes, which we haven't actually done too many remakes on this podcast. We haven't done a
No.
ton, probably because it's cult
Most of
movies
them,
and remakes
yeah,
end up kind of just being thrown away, and we just watch the original over and over again, and that ends up
very
being a cult
forgettable.
movie.
Yeah, exactly right.
But I do think it's interesting with remakes because in the same way that horror tends to reflect, like horror movies tend to reflect what's going on in our culture at any given time.
Yeah.
I think that remakes do the same thing because you see what gets changed from 1974 to 2006 to 2019. We kind of see how the world changes
You
and how
can,
cultures changes, and it paints this
yeah,
really interesting portrait.
you can almost directly compare and contrast the films. Yeah, yeah. So, we'll have to wait and see about that. But I wanted to close out this episode with a question about these remakes. So, Jeremy, why do you think this film in particular has been remade twice? Like, why do you think this particular cult film resonates so much, or what is it about this cult film that you think people are responding to?
So I have a complicated answer and a simple answer.
All right.
I think first I'll give the simple answer, and that is that it's a horror film set on a really popular holiday that people are really into the culture of, and it's easier to get people to get into the theater and make money when there's already the draw of the name recognition and the fact that it's on a big holiday. It's kind of just an easier sell than, it's probably an easier sell than Black Hanukkah. You know what I mean? Like it's that's the simple reason.
Right.
But a complicated reason, I think that people are drawn to this movie because it's kind of something universal. It's a really kind of on its base level is a story about not feeling safe in your own space. It's what's lurking in the dark. It's the unknown, which is what a lot of horror movies play on. But I think it's also this idea, because it's set on Christmas, is that's a time that is associated with being around family, being
Peaceful.
Cozy, peace,
Yeah.
love, literally which is actually something I didn't really even think of with this. But if you think about the Christmas story, you're talking about like the Virgin Mary and all of that. And the main character of this story is pregnant and trying to not keep the baby, which it just dawned on me how kind of crazy meta and brilliant that is. But I think that threat when you're supposed to be feeling safe would, for me, be the thing that lets this persist. What about you? Do you have an opinion on why you think this one keeps coming up?
Well, like you said, I think there's the shallow reason of it, being a horror film set during Christmas with a bunch of co-eds. I think that's kind of like a universal thing that a lot of people will be interested in. But then, there's, like you said, times change, and there's different angles that could be taken on, different subjects. And I think this particular story, I think it's pretty ripe for, I don't usually say this because, number one, I usually love the original more than whatever could be remade from it. And I'm not saying I'll even like this remake. I'm just saying I understand why they're going to remake it. And I also understand why it was remade in 2006, because that was in the flood of many older horror movies that were being remade around that time. They remade Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is like one of my favorite horror films of all time. So they made it a lot more generic, and they kind of watered it down a lot, in certain ways. So, so there was that wave of remakes, and now I feel like there may be another wave, and in the age of reboots and all of that, this is actually a little bit different, I think, in sort of an interesting way, and because it has more of like an indie feel and more of like an indie, I would say, like, I think the producers, like Get Out and things like that are behind it. I think it could be interesting.
Yep.
So, but I think there's just something about this idea that there can be a lot of different interpretations of. And while the original is a classic and phenomenal film, I think in a lot of ways, I think there are different ways that maybe it could be spun. But also maybe, people could just make a new movie, a new horror film based around Christmas time. Like, I don't necessarily feel like it has to be called Black Christmas or anything like that. You know what I mean?
I agree. I mean, there's always that thing with
it's
remakes.
done more for it's done more for marketing purposes, and to people always want that name recognition, and this is a cult film. Not that it's even a huge film or anything, but it's just a good name, Black Christmas. It's a good name.
No, it's a good name. And we also don't know how sometimes there's things with movie rights. I think I can't remember what. I think it might have been. In the series that I don't know if the episode, I believe it already came out. When we were talking about Return to Oz.
Yes, that one just came out. Yep.
That was a movie that they wanted to just make the movie because they own the rights to it. Yeah. So it could be a thing too where we see these remakes and maybe it's just something where someone has picked up the rights to the Black Christmas brand and is like, screw it, we already have the rights. We might as well make one. We might as well get one out there.
You said it. Yep.
So who knows? Who knows? We
knows?
We like to complicate things, but a lot of the time, I think it probably ends up being a lot more simple than we think.
It could just be a popcorn flick. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
And who knows how much it's going to actually relate to the original? I mean, it could be a lot, or it could be hardly at all. So we don't know. But there is something about this film. I think it is kind of like an anomaly in a way, and it stands on its own because Bob Clark didn't really make anything else quite like this, and because it came out earlier than a lot of films that we associate these kind of films with, so it kind of stands out in a lot of cool ways. So I guess that's going to do it for our very first holiday special here at Cult Movie Cult, and we will do one during some other holiday. We haven't discussed it yet, but we'll figure it out. All right, well, thanks for listening, Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult and be in Christmas, officially join the cult and be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side, and happy holidays, everyone.